The glass doors of Vanguard Dynamics didn't just open, they hissed, a sound that reminded Liam Miller of a predator marking its territory. As he stepped onto the expansive marble floor of the lobby, the sudden blast of air conditioning felt like a physical blow against his skin, chilled by the damp morning air outside. He adjusted the collar of his faded, grease-stained jacket, trying to hide a tear in the shoulder that he'd unsuccessfully tried to stitch the night before. His fingers, calloused and stained with the faint, permanent gray of engine oil, tightened around a crumpled manila folder. He knew he didn't belong here, but he also knew that the contents of that folder were the only thing standing between his daughter's next surgery and a total medical bankruptcy. In the center of the lobby, Marcus Sterling stood like a king surveying a conquered land. He was draped in a navy blue wool suit that probably cost more than Liam's last 3 cars combined. Marcus was mid-laugh, checking a gold watch that caught the overhead LED lights with a blinding glint, while a circle of young, polished executives hung on his every word. He looked like the personification of the American dream, but his eyes were cold, darting around the room to ensure everything was as perfect as his reflection. Liam took a deep breath, trying to steady his trembling hands, and began to walk toward the reception desk. He didn't see the slick patch of condensation near the coffee kiosk until it was too late. His boots skidded, his arms flailed for balance, and the lukewarm coffee he had been nursing for 3 hours flew through the air. It was a slow-motion nightmare. A single, dark splash landed squarely on the toe of Marcus Sterling's immaculate, $1,000 cognac suede shoes. The laughter in the lobby died instantly. It was replaced by a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Marcus froze, staring down at his foot as if a venomous snake had just crawled over it. Slowly, his head tilted up, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure, unadulterated disgust. "I am so sorry," Liam stammered, his face flushing a deep, humiliated red. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a handful of rough paper napkins. "I didn't see the spill on the floor. Let me get that for you, I can fix." Marcus didn't move a muscle. He didn't even let Liam get close. "Get away from me," he snapped, his voice a low, dangerous growl that vibrated through the quiet room. He stepped back as if Liam were a leper, his lip curling in a sneer. "Look at you. You're a walking biohazard. Did you just crawl out from under a bridge, or did you fall off the back of a garbage truck?" "I'm here for the engineering consultant interview," Liam said, his voice cracking as he tried to maintain a shred of dignity. "My name is Liam Miller. I have an appointment with the senior board at 10. Marcus let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter that drew the eyes of everyone from the security guards to the tourists outside the glass. "The board? You?" He turned to his assistants, gesturing wildly at Liam's tattered clothing. "Do you hear this? The service entrance is in the alley, buddy. That's where people like you belong. I don't care if you're here to fix a toilet or sweep the floors, you don't use the main elevator, and you certainly don't touch me." "It's not for the maintenance staff, sir," Liam insisted, holding up the folder. "It's for the Structural Integrity Project. If you just look at my credentials." Marcus didn't look at the folder. Instead, he reached out with 2 fingers, grabbed the visitor's badge clipped to Liam's jacket, and ripped it off with a violent jerk. The plastic snapped, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "I don't care if you're the Pope. HR is clearly losing their minds if they're letting the homeless wander in here for a tour. You're contaminating the air just by standing here." He tossed the badge into a nearby trash can with a flick of his wrist. "Security," Marcus bellowed, not breaking eye contact with Liam. "Get this trash out of my building before he stains the carpet. And make sure he stays on the sidewalk where the rest of the debris lives. Go back to your trailer park, Liam. Leave the big business to the professionals who can actually afford a dry cleaner." As 2 burly security guards grabbed Liam by the arms, Marcus turned his back, already dismissing Liam's existence. He pulled out a silk handkerchief and began to obsessively scrub at his shoe, his face twisted in a mask of elitist fury, completely unaware that the man he was throwing out was the only person in the world who knew his building was about to fall down. The cold morning air of Manhattan felt even sharper as Liam stood on the sidewalk, the heavy thud of the skyscraper's revolving doors still echoing in his chest. His heart hammered against his ribs, but as he looked down at his oil-stained hands, his mind drifted away from the present, pulled back by the gravity of a memory 2 decades old. He was 14 again, standing in the sterile, high-ceilinged hallway of St. Jude's Preparatory Academy. Back then, Marcus Sterling wasn't the hunter, he was the prey. Young Marcus had been a scholarship kid, a boy whose father spent his nights scrubbing the very floors Marcus now walked upon with such arrogance. Liam remembered seeing Marcus huddled in the corner of the locker room, his face bruised, while a group of wealthy white students, boys who looked exactly like the man Liam had become, laughed as they tossed Marcus's backpack into a flooded sink. They had called him a charity case. They had told him that no matter how hard he studied, he would always just be the help. Liam had been there, a silent witness, too afraid of his own social standing to step in. He saw the exact moment Marcus's soul hardened into diamond. Marcus didn't just want to be successful, he wanted to become the person who could never be hurt again. He had built a suit of armor out of spite, and now, he couldn't tell the difference between a threat and a man in need. The memory shifted, dissolving like smoke into a more recent, more painful reality. 5 years ago, Liam Miller didn't wear a grease-stained jacket. He wore crisp, charcoal gray blazers and sat at the head of design meetings at the country's top structural firm. He had been the golden boy of civil engineering, a man who saw the world in terms of load-bearing walls and tension points. But then came Sophie. He could still smell the sharp, antiseptic scent of the pediatric ICU. He remembered the sound of the ventilator, a rhythmic, mechanical hiss that seemed to count down the seconds of his daughter's life. The doctors had called it a rare pulmonary deficiency, a condition that required a specialized, high-altitude climate and a series of experimental surgeries that no insurance would fully cover. Liam didn't hesitate. He didn't think twice about the career he was dismantling. He sold the house with the 3-car garage. He sold the Italian suits and the luxury watch his father had given him. He moved Sophie to a small, drafty trailer near a specialized clinic in the mountains, taking whatever work he could find to keep the power on. He spent his nights under the rusted chassis of pickup trucks, his hands becoming permanently etched with the black grime of old engines, just to afford another week of Sophie's oxygen tanks. The jacket he wore now, the one Marcus had sneered at, was the only thing he had left from that transition, a heavy, durable work coat that had kept him warm through 3 winters of double shifts. Liam blinked, the New York City traffic noise rushing back in to drown out the sound of the ventilator. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, laminated photograph. In it, a little girl with a mess of blonde curls smiled through a plastic oxygen mask, holding up a crayon drawing of a skyscraper. "I'm so close, Sophie," he whispered, his voice catching in the wind. "I just need them to listen." He looked back up at the towering glass monolith of Vanguard Dynamics. He knew Marcus Sterling was up there, likely laughing about the homeless guy he had just humiliated. Marcus thought he was protecting his kingdom from a beggar, never realizing that the beggar was the only person who understood the fatal flaw in the building's foundation. Liam's eyes hardened, the desperation in them replaced by a cold, structural clarity. He wasn't just a father fighting for his daughter anymore, he was an engineer who knew that a foundation built on pride was the most unstable structure of all. He adjusted his grip on his folder, his mind already beginning to calculate a new way inside. He had spent years learning how to fix broken things that others had given up on, and he wasn't about to let a man in a $5,000 suit stop him now. The heavy, humid air of the service basement felt like a different world compared to the pristine, filtered oxygen of the floors above. Liam navigated the concrete labyrinth, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He knew the building's layout from the blueprints he'd studied at home. He just needed to get to the freight elevator, find the back stairwell, and bypass the lobby guards who had already seen his face. But as he reached the service junction, the sharp, rhythmic click-clack of high heels on concrete stopped him cold. A cloud of cloying, expensive perfume, something that smelled like lilies and cold steel, hit him a second before Sarah, Marcus Sterling's executive assistant, stepped around the corner. She didn't just look at Liam, she surveyed him with a squinted eye, her face contorting as if she'd stumbled upon a sewer leak. She checked her jewel-encrusted watch, sighed a long, theatrical breath, and began snapping her fingers rapidly in the air. Oh, absolutely not, Sarah drawled, her voice a sharp, nasal needle. I don't know what hole you crawled out of, but the temp agency was very clear that the loading dock crew was supposed to be gone by 9. We have high-profile investors arriving, and the last thing Mr. Sterling needs is to see whatever this is. She gestured vaguely at Liam's grease-stained jacket with a manicured hand, her nose crinkling in genuine repulsion. I'm not from the loading crew, Liam said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. I'm here because there's a critical error in the South Tower's structural math. The wind load bearing on the 42nd floor is. Sarah let out a high-pitched, mocking cackle that echoed off the damp concrete walls. Oh my God, stop. Just stop. Do you think because you watched a YouTube video on construction you can just walk in here and talk to the adults? It's embarrassing, really. You're trespassing, and quite frankly, you're making me uncomfortable. She didn't wait for a response. She pulled out her latest model smartphone, her thumb flying across the screen. I'm calling the police. I'm telling them we have a suspicious vagrant trying to steal trade secrets. It's for your own good, honey. Maybe a night in a cell will help you find a job that actually matches your aesthetic. Liam looked around desperately. He saw the janitorial staff and a few couriers standing nearby, but they all turned their heads away, staring intensely at the floor or their clipboards. They knew Sarah's reputation. They knew that one word from her could end their livelihoods. But in the shadows of the hallway, an older black man in a crisp security uniform named Leo watched the scene unfold. His face remained a neutral mask, but his grip tightened on his radio as he watched Sarah sneer at the man who was clearly at his breaking point. Please, Liam whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. My daughter is waiting for me to call her with good news. I just need 5 minutes with the board. I am a licensed engineer. Sarah didn't even look up from her phone. She was too busy adjusting her hair in the reflection of the screen. I'm sure you are, dear. And I'm the Queen of England. Now stay right there. The officers are already in the lobby. Don't make them use the tasers, it's such a mess to clean up. The betrayal of the silence around him stung worse than Sarah's words. Liam felt the walls closing in, the weight of 1,000 tons of steel above him feeling more fragile than ever. He saw the red and blue lights begin to flash through the high, dirty windows of the basement. He was isolated, framed as a criminal for trying to save the very people who were currently laughing at his shoes. As the heavy boots of the police echoed down the hall, Liam realized that the truth wasn't a shield in this building, it was a target. He looked at the trash can where his folder had been tossed, feeling his spirit finally start to fracture under the pressure of a world that only saw the wrapping and never the gift. The fluorescent lights of the precinct holding cell buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to vibrate inside Liam's skull. He sat on the edge of the cold metal bench, his head in his hands, staring at the grime-encrusted floor. The defeat felt absolute. By the time he had been processed and allowed his one phone call, the interview window had slammed shut. He had spent his final coins calling the trailer park manager to check on Sophie, only to hear the crushing news that her oxygen supply was running low and the credit card on file had been declined. He felt like a ghost, a man erased by a society that only valued the luster of a suit. But as the sun began to set, casting long, orange bars across the cell floor, the heavy iron door groaned open. You're free to go, Miller, the officer said, his voice devoid of the aggression from earlier. Bail was posted anonymously. A man named Leo left this for you at the desk. He handed Liam a thick, yellow envelope. Inside was Liam's original manila folder, perfectly smoothed out, and a small, handwritten note that simply said, "The building is talking, Liam. You're the only one who knows how to listen." As Liam walked out into the cool evening air, his mindset began to shift. The crushing weight of being a victim started to solidify into something sharper, something colder. He wasn't just a father in need anymore, he was a scientist who had identified a parasite. He realized that playing by the rules of a rigged game was why he was losing. If Marcus Sterling wanted a performance, Liam would give him a masterpiece. He didn't head back to the trailer. Instead, he walked toward a 24-hour internet cafe, his eyes burning with a newfound, calculated fire. Meanwhile, 40 floors above the city, the silence in Marcus Sterling's private office was shattered by a sound that made the hair on his arms stand up. It was a deep, guttural moan, the sound of steel under impossible stress. Marcus looked up from his crystal tumbler of scotch as a hairline fracture spider webbed across the corner of his floor-to-ceiling window. His lead architect burst into the room without knocking, his face the color of ash. "Marcus, we have a localized structural failure in the South Tower," the man gasped, his hands shaking as he laid out a digital tablet. "The sensors are redlining. The simulation software had a glitch. It missed a torsion shear point on the 42nd floor. The whole northeast corner is essentially floating on a prayer." Marcus felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. "Just fix it," he snapped, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Throw money at it. Get the best people on the phone." "We tried," the architect whispered, looking at his shoes. "We called the top 3 firms in the country. They all said the same thing. The only person who specializes in this specific recovery math, the only man who can save this building without a controlled demolition, is a consultant named L. Miller. The board recommended him months ago." Marcus felt the world tilt. He grabbed the tablet, scrolling through the consultant's digital portfolio. There, staring back at him in a professional headshot from 5 years ago, was the man he had called trash. The man he had arrested. The man whose coffee he had mocked. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow to the stomach. The vagrancy he had scrubbed from his lobby was the only foundation left holding up his entire legacy. Across town, Liam sat in the dim glow of a computer screen, watching the real-time structural feeds of Vanguard Dynamics. He saw the torsion shear. He saw the weakness. But he didn't call Marcus. He didn't beg for an apology. He began to type, his fingers moving with a surgical precision. He wasn't going to ask for a seat at the table anymore. He was going to own the room. The long game had begun, and for the first time in 5 years, Liam Miller felt like the most powerful man in New York City. The next 48 hours were a symphony of calculated silence. While Marcus Sterling spiraled into a panicked frenzy within the ivory tower of Vanguard Dynamics, Liam Miller moved through the city like a ghost reclaiming his spirit. He started in a place Marcus wouldn't recognize, a small, dimly lit office belonging to a high-end legal firm that specialized in property and land rights. Liam sat across from an attorney, his back straight, his voice devoid of the tremor that had plagued him in the lobby. He wasn't begging for an interview anymore. He was reviewing the ironclad land lease agreements his grandfather had signed decades ago, documents that proved that while Marcus owned the steel and glass, Liam was the silent landlord of the very dirt it sat upon. He authorized a series of encrypted wire transfers, moving the last of his carefully guarded, emergency savings not to a landlord, but to a high-end concierge service. In the upper echelons of the skyscraper, the atmosphere was thick with arrogance masked as triumph. Marcus stood in his office, sipping a vintage bourbon, watching as Sarah orchestrated a frantic but superficial cleanup of the project's public image. He had convinced himself that the structural groans were just settling sounds, and that he could simply buy his way out of any real disaster. He laughed with his junior executives, mocking the greasy vagrant he'd had arrested, using the story as a punchline to prove his superior instinct for filtering out the riffraff. Sarah joined in, her voice a sharp, grating staccato as she mimicked Liam's plea for his daughter. They were celebrating a victory over a man they thought they had crushed, unaware that the trash they removed had been the only thing keeping the ceiling from falling on their heads. While they laughed, Liam was undergoing a transformation that was more than skin deep. He stepped into a barber shop where the scent of bay rum and hot towels replaced the smell of engine grease. As the barber's straight razor glided over his jaw, removing the weeks of stress-induced stubble, Liam felt the weight of the last 5 years falling away like shorn hair. He then visited a private clothier, a place where the doors didn't hiss but opened with a respectful weight. He selected a tuxedo of midnight wool, the fabric so fine it felt like a second skin. He wasn't dressing for a party, he was arming himself for a coup. The silence of his preparation was punctuated only by secret, late-night phone calls. He spoke with the board of directors, not the ones Marcus dazzled with cocktail parties, but the silent institutional investors who actually held the power. He didn't lead with his grievance, he led with the math. He sent them the encrypted data packets showing the torsion shear and the embezzlement Marcus had used to hide the flaws. He spoke with Leo, the security guard, whose quiet observations over 30 years had turned him into a vault of corporate secrets. Every move Liam made was slow, deliberate, and invisible to the naked eye. As the morning of the grand gala approached, Marcus looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting his silk tie with a smug grin, believing he had won. He saw a king. But across town, in a modest room bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp, Liam Miller adjusted his own cuffs. He looked at the photo of Sophie on the table, her smile his North Star. He wasn't looking at a king in the mirror. He was looking at a man who was about to bring the whole kingdom down to earth. The trap was set, the evidence was logged, and the trash was coming back to collect everything that was owed. The lobby of Vanguard Dynamics had been transformed into a cathedral of vanity. Massive crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a shimmering, fractured light over the sea of black ties and silk gowns. The scent of expensive champagne and wagyu appetizers hung thick in the air, masking the metallic, dusty smell of the structural decay hidden behind the walls. Marcus Sterling moved through the crowd like a conquering hero, his chest puffed out, a glass of vintage crystal permanently fixed in his hand. He was the center of gravity, basking in the hollow praise of people who only loved his balance sheet. Sarah hovered at his elbow, her eyes darting around like a hawk, ready to swoop down on any server who dared to let a tray get too low or a napkin get out of place. It was in this moment of peak arrogance that the heavy glass doors hissed open one final time. A man stepped through, and for a heartbeat, the hum of the party faltered. He was draped in a midnight wool tuxedo that seemed to absorb the light around it, his stride possessing a quiet, lethal confidence that made people instinctively step aside. Sarah was the first to notice him. Not recognizing the face beneath the expertly groomed beard and sharp haircut, she immediately switched into her social climber mode. She glided toward him, a practiced, artificial smile plastered on her face, her eyes greedily scanning for a designer watch or a recognizable crest. "Welcome to the Vanguard Gala," she purred, her voice dripping with a fake, honeyed sweetness. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Are you with the Blackstone Group, or perhaps the London contingent?" The man didn't look at her. He didn't even break his stride. He scanned the room until his eyes locked onto Marcus, who was standing on a small, raised dais near the center of the room. "I'm here for the structural review, Sarah," the man said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried a weight of authority she couldn't place. Sarah froze. The voice sounded familiar, like a half-remembered nightmare. Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing as she took in the man's features. Before she could process the impossible truth, Marcus spotted them. He let out a loud, boisterous laugh and gestured for the newcomer to join him. "Ah, finally," Marcus shouted over the music, his face flushed with alcohol and ego. "My mystery savior arrives. Ladies and gentlemen, I told you the best in the business would be here to toast our success." Marcus stepped down from the dais, his hand extended in a gesture of fake camaraderie. But as he got closer, as the light hit the man's face, Marcus's hand began to slow. The color started to drain from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He stopped 3 feet away, his mouth hanging slightly open. "Liam?" Marcus whispered, the name sounding like a curse. "Is that what did you do? Steal a lottery ticket?" The crowd began to murmur, sensing the sudden shift in the room's temperature. A woman from the back of the room, a woman Liam recognized as the Karen from his apartment complex who had often called him a deadbeat in the laundry room, pushed her way forward. She was working as a high-end caterer for the event, and her face twisted into a mask of indignant rage. "Excuse me," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Liam. "This man is a fraud. He lives in a trailer park. He's a mechanic who can't even pay his water bill. He doesn't belong here with us." Sarah's eyes widened as the pieces finally clicked together. She let out a sharp, jagged laugh of relief. "Oh my God, you're right. It's the coffee spiller. I knew that voice was too common to be anyone important. Marcus, he must have rented that suit with his daughter's lunch money." Marcus regained his footing, his embarrassment turning into a cruel, sharp-edged weapon. He looked around at his guests, inviting them into the joke. "You heard the lady, folks. This is the man who thought he could sit at our table. Liam, I have to hand it to you, the disguise is almost believable. But a pig in a tuxedo is still a pig." He stepped closer to Liam, his voice dropping to a hiss meant only for them. "You think because you cleaned up that you're an equal? You're a footnote, Liam. You're the dirt under my heel. Now, get out of here before I have security throw you out again. This time, with the cameras rolling so the whole world can see the great engineer in handcuffs." Liam didn't flinch. He didn't look angry. In fact, he looked almost pitying. He checked his phone, a cold, clinical smile touching his lips. "You're right about one thing, Marcus," Liam said, his voice perfectly calm as a deep, subterranean groan shook the floor beneath their feet. "Timing is everything. And your time just ran out." The subterranean groan that shook the lobby wasn't just the settling of a building, it was the sound of a legacy fracturing. As the guests gasped and clutched their champagne flutes, Liam Miller didn't flinch. He walked slowly toward the center stage, his presence so commanding that the room fell into a deathly, expectant silence. Marcus stood frozen, his face a twitching mask of confusion and mounting dread. Liam reached out and calmly took the wireless microphone from Marcus's numb fingers. The feedback hissed for a second before his voice boomed through the high-fidelity speakers, steady and absolute. "My name is Liam Miller," he began, his eyes locking onto Marcus with a surgical precision. "And I'm not here for an interview. I'm not here to fix your shoes, and I'm certainly not here to be your punchline. Marcus, you've spent the last hour telling everyone that I don't belong in this room. But there's something you neglected to tell them. You forgot to mention that Vanguard Dynamics doesn't own the ground it's built on. My grandfather signed a 99-year land lease in 1952. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, due to multiple safety violations and the failure to maintain structural integrity, that lease has been terminated. You aren't standing in your lobby, Marcus. You're trespassing on my property." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah's jaw literally dropped, her phone slipping from her hand and clattering onto the marble. Marcus tried to speak, but only a dry, wheezing sound came out. Liam signaled the massive LED monitors behind the stage. Instead of the glossy promotional videos of the South Tower, the screens filled with grainy, high-definition security footage. The room watched in silence as the video played Marcus ripping the badge off Liam's chest, Sarah mocking his daughter's illness, and Marcus's cruel laughter in the lobby. Then, the screen shifted to a series of red-stamped financial documents, records of Marcus diverting millions into offshore accounts to hide the fact that the building was failing. The color didn't just leave Marcus's face, it seemed to evaporate, leaving him looking aged and hollow. Liam turned to the side of the room where the board of directors sat in stunned silence. From their midst, Leo, the security guard who had watched the lobby for 3 decades, stood up. He wasn't wearing his polyester uniform anymore. He was draped in a charcoal overcoat, standing next to the chairman of the board. "Marcus," Leo said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of observation. "I've watched a lot of men walk through those doors. I've seen them rise and I've seen them fall. You used to be a man who cared about the work. But you let the suit wear you. You let the title make you blind. You didn't just fail the math, you failed the people." The chairman of the board stepped forward, his face like flint. "Marcus Sterling, as of this moment, the board has voted unanimously to remove you as CEO. The authorities are waiting in the holding bay for your statement regarding the embezzlement and the endangerment of 2,000 employees. You're finished." Marcus fell back against the podium, his legs giving out. He looked at the crowd, searching for a single friendly face, but the very people who had been laughing at his jokes minutes ago were now pulling away as if he were contagious. Sarah tried to sneak toward the exit, but 2 police officers, the very same ones she had called on Liam days earlier, stepped into her path, handcuffs glinting under the chandeliers. Liam stood over Marcus, not with anger, but with a cold, devastating clarity. "You called me trash, Marcus. You told me to go back to the gutter. But the thing about the gutter is that you learn how to see the cracks before they break you. I didn't save this building for you. I saved it for the families who deserve to feel safe in it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a daughter to go see." The room erupted into a cacophony of whispers and camera flashes as Marcus was led away, his head bowed, his $1,000 suede shoes scuffing pathetically against the marble floor he no longer owned. Liam walked off the stage, the crowd parting for him not out of fear, but out of a sudden, profound respect for the man they had all tried to ignore. The chaos of the gala faded into a distant hum as the sirens of the police cruisers died away, leaving the lobby of Vanguard Dynamics in a state of stunned, reflective silence. For Marcus Sterling, the world had ended not with a bang, but with the cold, metallic click of handcuffs. Within weeks, the headlines had devoured him. The Golden CEO was revealed to be a paper tiger, his assets seized and his reputation incinerated by the very media that had once idolized him. Sarah, too, vanished from the high society circles she had so desperately craved, her name blacklisted from every recruitment firm in the tri-state area. The tower remained standing, but the names on the lease had changed forever. Liam Miller didn't spend his time gloating in a corner office. Instead, he channeled the sudden windfall of his reclaimed land rights and his new role as chief structural consultant into a singular purpose. He founded the Sophie Miller Foundation, a center dedicated to providing top-tier pediatric respiratory care for families who lived in the shadows of the city's skyscrapers. He made sure that no father would ever have to stand in a grease-stained jacket, begging for the life of his child, while being judged by the cost of his shoes. 5 years passed with the steady, quiet rhythm of a life well lived. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Liam pulled his modest SUV to the curb near a local community park. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a tattered work coat, he wore a simple, clean sweater and jeans. As he stepped out, he watched a man in a faded, orange utility vest pushing a wide industrial broom across the park's walkway. The man moved slowly, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the pavement. It was Marcus. There was no gold watch on Marcus's wrist anymore, and his hands, once soft and manicured, were now rough and calloused. He stopped when he saw Liam's shadow fall across the path. Marcus didn't flinch or sneer. He simply stood there, leaning on his broom, his face lined with the quiet exhaustion of a man who had finally learned what it meant to work for a living. Liam walked over and held out a steaming cup of coffee. "It's a cold one today, Marcus," he said softly. His voice held no edge, no lingering ghost of the anger that had once fueled him. "You look like you could use a break." Marcus looked at the cup, then up at Liam. For a long moment, the silence between them was filled only with the sound of wind through the changing leaves. Marcus reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and took the coffee. He didn't look for a stain on the cup or a reason to complain. He took a sip, the warmth seemingly reaching parts of him that had been frozen for years. "Thank you, Liam," Marcus whispered, his voice raspy and humble. I never really understood until now. I spent my whole life trying to never be the man with the broom, that I forgot that the man holding the broom is still a man. I'm sorry. For everything." Liam nodded slowly, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "We all have our own structures to build, Marcus. Sometimes, the old ones have to fall down completely before you can find a foundation that actually holds." A high-pitched laugh rang out from the playground nearby. Liam turned to see Sophie, now a vibrant, healthy 10-year-old with a mess of curls and eyes full of life, running toward him. She didn't see a CEO or a janitor, she just saw her father. She threw her arms around Liam's waist, and in that moment, the true measure of success was clear. Life is a complex architecture of moments, a series of blueprints that we draw and redraw as we go. We are often tempted to judge the strength of a building by the shine of its glass, forgetting that the true integrity lies in the parts we cannot see. Karma isn't a shadow lurking in the dark to punish us. It is a mirror reflecting the energy we put into the world. It reminds us that every person we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about, and that a single act of kindness or a single moment of cruelty can alter a life's design forever. In the end, we aren't remembered for the shoes we wore or the towers we built, but for the hands we reached out to hold when the world started to shake.